Hey everybody, Zippo here, and I wanted to talk a little bit about my brand new old hi-fi system. So, as you may have seen from earlier videos, I like my fair share of retro tech and oddities, but these past few years I've been getting increasingly interested again in audio, but I've not really had a great system to play anything on. Back in high school and college, I had my parents' amazing old Sony Hi-Fi that supported my collection of CDs, tapes, my love of all things radio, and of course my then burgeoning Winamp collection through an auxiliary port, but it unfortunately was relegated to the garage and has since sadly stopped working. So for a while now I've been jumping between my laptop, the odd portable speaker, my boombox, various vintage radios that I have, things like that, but what I've really been wanting for quite some time is a properly decent hi-fi. Nothing too expensive, I'm not made of money, and in the future I'd like to assemble something really special, but for the moment just an entry-level system, something that'll support me and my girlfriend's pretty decent CD and vinyl collection. I still have quite a lot of tapes as well that I'd like to keep and also record onto, and I listen to quite a lot of radio, so I do have quite a lot of asks really, and for that reason I have spent quite some time researching it, and this is what I finally settled on. Yes, the Sony La Scala system is a compact MIDI hi-fi that dates from the 1990s. This one in particular only had one previous owner, and I picked up the entire setup for £150 from an asking price of £200, so not too bad for a system that probably would have cost £700 to £800 back when it was new. Apparently it was a very well reviewed system as well, however it isn't one I'd ever really heard much about. I actually found out about it through one of my very favourite YouTube channels, Techmoan. If you follow me, you've probably seen his stuff in the past, but you may recognize this part of my setup in particular. He bought this particular tape deck, the TA-S2, for a video a while back all about recording onto cassette tapes. Now what this didn't come with is the very distinctive and interesting original speakers. It also didn't come with the original remote. Now I knew this was the case when I bought it, but the gentleman I bought it off actually went to the trouble of including a different Sony remote, which was very nice of him. Now it works for the volume on and off functions and all the things relating to the amp, but otherwise everything else is non-functioning. I imagine that's because it doesn't have the AU bus cables on the back linked together that also didn't come with the setup. It also doesn't have a turntable, but I don't know actually if the La Scala ever really had a turntable to go with it, but I'll get onto the turntable and stuff later. For the moment though, I have decided to save a bit of money and I'm reusing the speakers from my previously mentioned parents' old Sony LBT, so at the very least some of that system has survived to this day. The 90s, it seems, had quite a lot of very nice high-end systems that incorporated the most cutting-edge technology of the time and looked really quite nice. But perhaps most importantly for me and my wallet is that at the moment they probably rank quite low on the scale of desirable retro tech. It doesn't quite have the cool 70s aesthetic or the warm VU meters of older systems. There isn't the throwback feel of something like an 80s Yamaha or Technics. There's no wood in it, for example, the kind of things that end up in places like the top of Reddit's r/vintage audio, but it still does look gorgeous and it fits in very well with my current setup at home. And although it may not have all the satisfyingly clunky buttons and bulb-lit displays of older systems, it does have a lot of solid buttons and metal dials throughout, my favourite being the very subtle backlit volume dial that moves up and down on its own when you're using the remote as well. Something else that is very handy is that it has these little additional sockets in the back so that it can be daisy chained into the amp and it'll only take up the one socket on my wall, which is also quite nice. I do also have one spare, so maybe if I find something I could hook it up in the future through that. The tuner has a very nice display. It apparently has a number of programmable presets, however all I really listen to is Radio Scotland and Radio 4, so I never have much need to go beyond that. The CD player is also nice too. It has shuffle. It also has this programmable setting. I haven't really taken much of a look at that. Generally I tend to just play CDs and albums in their original running order, but I'll need to take a closer look at it and some of the manuals online and find out more about those kind of particular settings. The tape deck is interesting though, and of course this was the reason it was featured in that previously mentioned Techmoan video. It's quite a high-end piece of kit. It has Dolby S built in. That was some of the most cutting-edge technology available towards the end of the cassette era. It also has this auto calibration that you can see here, which is a fancy piece of tech that kind of records and plays back onto the cassette tape and analyzes it so you can record it at the optimum quality. To be honest, I do like recording onto tapes as a bit of fun, but it's not really something I'll be doing a great deal of. However, it is nice to have. I do have quite a large library of cassette tapes that I want to play back and also digitize. A few albums here and there, but mainly kind of recordings, interviews, radio shows, kind of historical stuff that I'd like to preserve and archive. So it is pretty handy for that too. Now back to the amp, and of course this is really the main event, as this is where everything is funneled through and it's where most of the day-to-day use is going to be occurring. One of the nice things I thought about buying this was maybe that I wouldn't have to worry so much about it arriving broken or in need of repair, since it hasn't been kicking around for quite as long or as many decades as some of the other things on the market. Well, like I say, that is what I thought anyway. Yes, because almost immediately I started noticing a problem. It seems like the amp has quite a nasty habit of not outputting any sound. Now, the headphone jack worked fine, and occasionally the speakers would too, but play it for too long and suddenly it would just simply cut out, often accompanied by quite a worrying rattling sound. Now, after opening it up, we traced the problem back to this relay switch, which it seems controls whether the signal feeds out to the headphone jack or the speaker output. Something inside this wee box, it seems, was sticking and causing the rattling, meaning that when it warmed up, the switch would get stuck, only outputting through the headphone jack. A problem to be sure, but maybe not a disastrous one. However, I didn't have any idea what the repair bill might be like. It seemed like a relatively simple soldering job, but since the majority of soldering that I have done is on the cheap, on car stereos and decidedly imprecision equipment, it was well outside what I was willing to attempt. However, the bright side was that after contacting the seller, I got a full refund on the cost of the amp, almost £70. So my option now was either to buy a new one and hope it worked, or try and get this one fixed, which may be expensive or might not even be possible locally on the remote windswept archipelago of Orkney where I currently live. However, I took the plunge, disconnected the unit, wrapped it up, dropped it off at the local electronics shop in town, expecting either a bill that would probably exceed the value of the machine or news that it wasn't something they could fix or replace. You can imagine my surprise then when I got a call no more than 3 hours later telling me that the amp was ready to be picked up. The total bill, £36. Talk about a good deal. I now have a working amp, a fully functioning system, and all for £40 less than I had originally paid. Talk about a result. So yes, I now had a functioning system that supported cassette, CD, radio, and even my various MP3 players via the digital import. However, I thought I'd go one step further and pick up this. It's a Logitech Bluetooth receiver, because luckily this amp, as you can see, has an extra MIDI input, allowing me to have both a dedicated Bluetooth as well as an auxiliary cable channel, which is always probably a wise future-proofing decision nowadays, what with the way smartphones are going. This is a fantastic little bit of kit, incidentally. It cost me £25 and it sits on the top of the amp and has a range throughout my entire flat. The final piece of the puzzle, though, is at the other end of the scale, the record player. Now, this was probably the most difficult choice. I've had a couple of exceedingly cheap record players in my past, but this was something I generally never had much knowledge in. My ultimate aim would be to get a classic Sony turntable to properly match the La Scala, but at the moment I just wanted something functional and reliable with a good track record for a kind of entry-level device, so I went for the Pro-Ject Audio Essential. Nothing too stand out in terms of design or features, but for £150 it came pre-packaged, pre-weighted, plugged straight into the amp, and what's more, it sounded great. So this has been my journey of assembling my hi-fi. I'm sure I overpaid for plenty of things, or that my setup is possibly the worst thing ever. I suppose this is the internet after all, but I am incredibly happy with the results. I have a pretty wide collection of formats, and even things like my various iPods and MP3 players have unique libraries within them, and I wanted to be able to access them. So for quite a nice looking system for a reasonable enough price that can support almost a century of different ways of playing audio, I think I got a pretty good deal. I think my advice, if you're looking for a hi-fi system to get you started on the audiophile scene, is to perhaps buy 1, a system from the 90s, 2, if it's not working, not to panic, the problem might be easier to fix than you think, and 3, support your local electronics shop, because goddamn do they come in useful. Now, if and when I get new equipment, be it speakers or a record player or whatever, I will let you guys know. But for now, I'm either going to go enjoy listening to some music or stream some things off Bluetooth or play some records, or you know what I mean. I'm gonna go listen to some music. Bye-bye.